Welcome to CivilNet. On May 3rd, the Republic of Nagorno Karabakh, for the 6th time, held parliamentary elections. There were observers from all over the world, and there was an election observer mission also from the United States. My guests here in the studio are three of those observers. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to introduce you one at a time, if I may. Karin Mac Donald, you are the director of the UC Berkeley Law's Election Administration Research Center. Then we have Gail Pellerin. You are the Chief Election Officer of Santa Cruz County. And Kristen Abajian of UC Davis Human Rights Initiative. Welcome to CivilNet, and thank you for being our guests.
Thank you.
Karin, I know that this is not your first time observing elections, but for Gail and Kristen, it is your first time.
Correct. Yeah.
There are many questions I want to ask, but I'm going to start by talking about the methodology that you employed. Now, there were election observers from the European Union, from MEPs were here from different countries, but your approach is slightly different. You don't just come and visit a few polling stations throughout the day and then move on to the next.
That's correct. We founded a group that is a collaboration between UC Davis, the Human Rights Initiative that Kristen is a member of, and my group, which is the Election Administration Research Center at Berkeley. And we developed a very comprehensive methodology by which to evaluate elections. And it includes, actually it starts with the group of people that we go into the field with, which includes subject matter experts, researchers in the field, and then also cultural experts. And we feel like, that kind of independence that it gives us to also understand the language, understand the culture, and really come in with appropriate methodology, with research guides, gives us an opportunity to really understand what goes on in the field and not miss as much as you may if you're just showing up for a day, going to a few polling places, saying hello, and then leaving. So we start with pre-election day interviews that are very comprehensive.
And who do you interview, for example?
I'm sorry?
Who do you interview, for example?
We interview journalists, we interview people on the street, we interview potential voters. We go to polling places the day before the election. We talk to journalists, we talk to the human rights ombudsman, and then of course we also talk to the election commission members. And so that gives us a comprehensive idea of where we should be focusing our efforts.
The day of the elections.
That's before the election.
Right.
And then the day of the election, we use all that information, exactly. And we go to opening procedures. So we're there before the polls open. We look at what happens with the ballots when they come out of the safe. Were they secure? How were they kept before election day? Then what happens with those ballots once they come out? How are people organized in the polling places and the workers? Are the ballot boxes sealed? Who is there signing in? Who is supervising? Who are the proxies? So we observe the entire opening process. Then we go to the next stage, which is daytime operations. We again go to different election polling places and we observe that. And then at night, we go to a closing procedure. So how are the ballots counted? And then we follow the ballots to the regional election commission. So, it's a long day. But
Sure.
We watch from
but a very comprehensive
absolutely
look at how the election process is actually taking place.
Exactly.
Gail, I want to switch over now and talk not so much about the details of election day. Nagorno-Karabakh, the Republic of Nagorno Karabakh, is not a recognized republic. We often say here in Armenia and in Karabakh, obviously, that it has all the attributes of a democracy, of a republic, of a state, of an independent country. This was your first time in Karabakh. It was the first time that you were an election monitor here at the elections. What was your sense of the process itself? There was 70% turnout. That's a pretty high number.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very real, and it's very similar to how we conduct elections in Santa Cruz County. And I'm proud that our state of California has passed a resolution recognizing Nagorno-Karabakh, and Fresno County has also done a Board of Supervisors resolution. And when I return, I'm going to be asking my board to also do a resolution to recognize Nagorno-Karabakh. So it was very real. The poll workers were extremely well trained. Voters very engaged, as you said. Turnout was amazing, with 70.6%. And yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because the OSCE and a number of other international bodies and countries said, we don't recognize these elections.
Yeah. Have they been here? I challenge them to come and see the country and meet with the representatives and the government officials and talk to the people living there, because it is very real.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Kristen, I'm going to ask you, UC Davis, the Human Rights Initiative. This is also your first time as an election observer?
Yes.
And the first time in Karabakh?
Not the first time in Karabakh, but the first time I'm doing elections in Karabakh.
And so this is a sort of a consortium of different organizations. You have the university, so you have the academic, you have the political, and this is the human rights aspect of it. What were your impressions of the elections?
I was very impressed from a human rights perspective in Artsakh. Some of the specific things we were looking for were disability, how the disabled gets to the polling stations, and something we found very impressive was that we went to a polling place in the Shushi prison. So we were just shocked that there'd be a polling station in a prison, and even though there were only 17 prisoners there eligible to vote, they still had a polling station available from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. just in case anyone would be admitted to the prison during that time. So from a human rights perspective, I think the biggest thing Nagorno-Karabakh has to maybe improve on is how to get those disabled in wheelchairs, the elderly, to get to the polling station.
Were proxy votes not allowed, or when they actually go to the homes of people who are not
so
able
what
to
we
move?
understood was they do not go to the homes of any voters. If someone is blind, they have to come to the polling station and bring someone trusted, a family member, or anyone by their choosing to come to the polling station with them and to help them vote. But anyone in a wheelchair seems like it would be almost impossible to get to the polling station. We were barely able to walk through all of the uneven roads and the really steep stairs. So I think that would be a great improvement if somehow disabled individuals were able to cast their votes in an easier way.
It's interesting, we're talking about the details, and yet there's a whole global aspect to this. But Karin, I want to ask you, this was your second time. You will be preparing a report, I presume, on your findings. Yes. But did you, I'm going back and forth a little bit, but did you stay in Stepanakert, or did you go to some of the remote villages to see how the vote was taking place there?
Yeah, we went to 6 or
We went to
7.
We went to six
regions.
Regions, right?
6 different regions.
In one day, you were able to do that?
Well, we had 2 teams,
Okay.
because we met up with election observers from, also academics from Mexico and from Brazil.
There, you didn't know about each other
No, we
beforehand.
did not know about each other. So we had a meeting before the election and trained them on our methodology, and they, of course, are, they're academics, so they're research trained. So they actually assisted us, and we're going to do a comprehensive report. We call it the, Election Observation Mission from the Americas, and it really is strictly academic. And so we had these 2 teams that went to a total of 16 polling places on election day. And I think we spent an average of at least 45 minutes to an hour, at least, at every polling place.
To get a sense of what was going on.
Yes. So for us, it's not just going in and seeing, are there signs, is there somebody there? For us, it's, sitting down, really observing the process, really figuring out what's going on, and seeing if voters come in that have questions. Are voters turned away? Are there discrepancies? So we really feel like we had a good sense by doing this, and also looking at the city as well as the rural jurisdictions, because oftentimes there is a difference.
Sure. And is there an improvement from the last time that you were here?
Yeah, well, it's just 3 years is not that much of time to actually, ask a government to make some improvements. We followed up with some of the government officials, and I think there is a real there's an effort to improve things. It's a political process, you know.
Yeah.
It's very easy to affect change if you're a totalitarian government, because then you're just going to tell everybody to do it differently.
Right.
You know, if you have a democratic process, you know, it takes a little bit more time. But there is an absolute willingness to look at our recommendations and then integrate them, perhaps, in figuring out a way by which they may work for the Republic.
Yeah, it's astounding. You know, I recall a number of years ago during one of the elections taking place in Nagorno Karabakh, an expert in the region said that perhaps the most democratic place in the South Caucasus was Nagorno Karabakh. So Gail, you know, you are the county clerk or chief election officer. Were you able to meet with some of your counterparts in Karabakh during the elections or before the elections?
So yes, I did have the opportunity with my team to meet with the Central Election Commission director, and we had a nice briefing from her. And then when we were in the field, I was able to talk to the poll workers in my position in Santa Cruz County. I'm an elected officer of the county, and I do all the poll worker training. And I was very impressed to see that poll workers actually have 7 days of training, the main 3 poll workers at each polling station, and they have 9 poll workers at each station. In my county, we're lucky to get 3, 4, maybe 5 in some cases, and recruiting those poll workers is really difficult. And getting the voters to turn out at the polls is a big job. And the turnout in Nagorno-Karabakh was outstanding with the 70.6%. And the poll workers were very well trained, very well staffed. Everybody was there. They took it very seriously. People were well dressed. Voters made great effort to get there. Our first voter at the first polling site was an elderly voter, had difficulty reading and understanding the ballot, and the president of the polling site actually took her aside, took her to the instructions, showed her how to mark the ballot, explained everything in detail, and she went back and voted again. And then we went to the regional election center as well after the polls closed and witnessed the operation there. And that's what we do in our county, is that's when election day is over and the voters have all finished their voting, then the work begins to tally and audit those votes, and that's exactly what they were doing. So,
and you stayed in some of those as well to follow the count of the.
Yes. And we sat at the polling station as it closed. So it closed at 8 p.m. and then they went through their closing procedures, and it took about an hour and a half almost for them to do all that, maybe even 2 hours to count each ballot. We don't count the votes at the polls. We wrap everything up and bring it to a central counting. But there was a time before my time where we did count the ballots at the polls, so it was interesting to see that process. And we do our manual recounts during our audit period. So I saw many similarities between how we do elections in Santa Cruz and how they're conducted in Nagorno-Karabakh.
So definitely on the road, on the path to democracy, if not already there for Nagorno-Karabakh. It's astounding. Kristen, I want to ask you, were there any instances where there was any questionable activity? Were there people gathered outside polling stations to intimidate voters? Were there any complaints that you came across?
As Karin said, we visited 6 regions, 16 polling places, and across the board, we really didn't find anything that stuck out to us as being irregularities. They followed the procedures. There were no campaigning the day before. There were no campaigning outside the polling places. All the presidents or chairpersons of the polling places had their polling stations in control. A couple of the voters, sometimes the presidents would tell the voters stop talking if they were talking to each other while they were voting. Everything was really in control and transparent and looked really good on our
And the political parties that were participating, did they have their representatives following the election day process there?
Yes, there were proxies there from all the 7 political parties there at every polling station we attended.
Well, it certainly sounds that it's really amazing. You know, a newly formed republic, 23, 24 years old, having gone through war, still in a state of war, really, on the border and the line of contact, and yet really making a huge effort to ensure that the institutions and values of democracy are entrenched in society. And one of the most sort of apparent signs of that is voting, the right to vote and the freedom to vote.
Exactly. And also, inviting people in like us and saying, okay, we will give you access to everything. Just, go anywhere. And it's an open environment that really shows a commitment to democracy because, they're not afraid of what we're going to find.
Right.
So that's, to me, that is a really courageous statement.
Well, and thank you for coming. Thank you for observing, and thank you for talking to us about the elections, and it gives us a lot of hope for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
For having us.
I'd like to remind our viewers that my guests were 3 international observers who took part in the parliamentary elections in Nagorno Karabakh that took place on May 3, Gail Pellerin, Karin Mac Donald, and Kristen Abajian. Stay with CivilNet.